Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Rebecca Lingafelter, and I teach in the theater department. This session of the Gender Studies Symposium is Artistic Expression of Gender and Sexuality. And we're really excited to have two students here from the University of Puget Sound and one of our very own here from Lewis and Clark. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody today. Before we hear from the presenters, I just want to remind everyone who's here that your video and audio will remain muted for the session. And after the panelists have finished their individual presentations, we'll have some time for questions and comments from the audience, at which point you will be unmuted by the session host. A little housekeeping on the questions at the end. You can put your questions in at any time to the chat directly to Kendall, who's one of the co-chairs of the symposium. So if at any point inside of someone's presentation a question arises for you, you can just do it in real time. You don't have to wait until the end. And then when we do the question portion of the session, we'll be taking questions from the chat, and you can also choose to raise that little blue hand in your participants menu as things come up, and so we can keep it really organic and a conversation amongst all of us as much as we can on Zoom, not sharing the same space. If you experience any problems during the session, you can send a chat message directly to the host. We're using Zoom auto captioning, which you can access at the bottom of your screen by just clicking on the button for closed caption. We are recording this session at the permission of the presenters for archival purposes and their own purposes, but no unauthorized recording is permitted. So I'm going to introduce each panelist as we go. And I'm going to start with Dana Levy, who is an undergraduate student at the University of Puget Sound studying gender and queer studies, English and music. A violinist, they believe that queer and trans identity always play a role in music making and strive to merge their work in music with their work in gender studies. Their presentation is titled, "We Are Ever New, Transcending the Theme of Music Through the Life and Works of Beverly Glenn-Copeland."
Thanks for the introduction, Rebecca. I'm just gonna take a second to share my screen. Hi, as I've already been introduced, my name is Dana Levy. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. I'm a senior at UPS, and this presentation was my senior thesis for the Gender and Queer Studies program. It's entitled, "We Are Ever New, Transcending the Time of Music Through the Life and Works of Beverly Glenn-Copeland," who is pictured on this slide. And I'm just going to start off with a quote. For Beverly Glenn-Copeland, it's all about time. He says, "We don't know what the timing for anything is. We don't know the timing of our death, our children, when they will appear to us, our perfect mate or several perfect mates. We don't know anything, really. We think we do, but there's a purpose to each life, and for some people, it's not revealed immediately. For some people, it's revealed very early. For some people, it's revealed again and again as they go along. For me, that purpose has only recently been revealed." A Black trans-masculine musician and composer, known to most as just Glenn, Glenn-Copeland's life is pervaded by this muddled sense of time, from his late-in-life transition to his ethereal, genre-bending music. His is an explicitly trans sense of time. And just for a little bit more background, as I said, Glenn-Copeland is a Black trans-masculine composer, singer, and musician. His discography spans from 1970 with the release of his first album as a 20-something, 21-year-old, to the present day when he's still producing and releasing music. He was the first Black student at the McGill University Conservatory in Montreal and the only out queer student at the time. He came out as a trans man in 2002 in middle age. And his music only became more well-known after a rare records collector in Japan uncovered an original cassette of his album Keyboard Fantasies in 2016. He sold the 30-odd remaining copies that Glenn-Copeland had left, and after that, like a month later, he had about 10 offers from different record companies to re-release several of his older albums. So after that kind of strange and unexpected success, he began touring with a band of young musicians in 2019, unfortunately only to be cut short by the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. So yeah. So in this presentation, using Glenn-Copeland as a case study, I'm arguing that music written, performed, and produced by trans people must be analyzed through a practice of musicology that intentionally centers trans subjectivities. I advocate for a practice of transmusicology that not only takes into account the voice and the body in the analysis of performance, but also contextualizes the sound of music within trans modes of time and history, in effect, transing the time of music. And you might ask, why this analytic of time? Because really time is the overarching logic of both life and music. But what does this mean when the very concept of time and history is fraught, as it is for trans individuals? We can hear trans time in the sound of repetitious and static music, music with jumbled historical reference, as I'll go over later. And my framework of transmusical time is meant to augment existing frameworks in the as of yet very small field of transmusicology isn't meant to be comprehensive, but rather part of the ongoing and fluctuating conversation surrounding trans subjectivity in the context of music. My methodologies are grounded in queer and trans theory and music theory, as it there are very few I guess like there's not a lot of intersection at this moment in time between trans studies and music theory and musicology. So I think that by listening to the substance of Glenn-Copeland's music, we can understand the ways in which it creates a sound of trans time, as well as how his lived and embodied subjectivity informs this sound. I use tracks from his career retrospective album called Transmissions as my primary source. I focus on repetitious and unproductive sounds that characterize queer and trans time, such as, for example, the presence or absence of common musical forms, stasis and its interruption, among others. I use lyrics to enhance my musical analysis rather than foregrounding the lyrics over the substance and sound of the music itself. And importantly, as a disclaimer, my analysis of his music isn't meant to presume anything about his life beyond what I've read. I'm merely communicating and interpreting what I hear to be present in his music. So I'm going to go through 3 examples of the kind of analysis that I did in my thesis with this music. Starting with Ever New. Did I just stop sharing my screen? I did. Sorry about that. Starting with Ever New, which was released on his album Keyboard Fantasies in 1986, and I'm just going to play a little bit of it. Unfortunately, I have to stop it there. But as we can kind of hear from this example, the effect of the song as a whole is really unhurried, engrossing, and beautiful in its simplicity. identify the repetitious synth line that we hear before the voice comes in, that weaves throughout the song as the mantra, as kind of a nod to Glenn-Copeland's Buddhist faith. After the second full repetition of the mantra, the listener is led to expect a full cadence and a definitive end, but it repeats a third time, creating a sense of timelessness. Music theorist Jonathan Kramer's idea of vertical music applies here. The elongated, sometimes non-existent phrase structure results in, quote, a single present stretched out into an enormous duration, a potentially infinite now, that nonetheless feels like an instant. And although we only got to hear a little snippet of the song, it becomes more evident if you listen to the whole thing, which I do recommend. When a conclusive cadence finally arrives after the third repetition of the mantra over a minute into the song, it's with a sense of belatedness and peace. The cadence, as a structuring element of Western music, represents a teleological conclusion or a goal to be achieved. By delaying this conclusion and denying this goal through the aesthetic of virtual time, time itself is trans. The purpose of the music is not to drive forward, but to sit back and enjoy the ride. He doesn't ask with his sounds, are we there yet? But instead says, we are here now. And if we arrive at a certain destination, it's a moment of serendipity and not of teleology. And taking a moment to analyze lyrics, rather than think of the line, welcome to you, both young and old, as a gesture of welcome to those who are young and those who are old, there's a certain transpotentiality in thinking of this as a referent to those who, like Glenn-Copeland, are simultaneously young and old, shedding the boundaries of chronological aging and clock time. The phrase "we are ever new" itself indicates a refusal of normative modes of aging and gestures to Jose Esteban Munoz's queer horizon and his conception of queerness that is not just being but actively doing, quote, for and towards the future. And my second example is a performance of the African American spiritual Deep River in 2018.
Deep river, my home is over Jordan. Lord, I want to cross over into campground.
Glenn-Copeland's performance of Deep River here reinvents the context of its constituent sounds in a way that counters histories of oppression, subversively rewriting the past by adding West African drumming to the song and reclaiming a mode of cultural expression that was stolen from his forebears. He merges the spiritual, a genre originally performed a cappella, with West African drumming, and speaks about the significance of this decision, saying that during times of slavery, many communities of West Africans enslaved in the U.S. were not permitted to use traditional drums, such as the djembe that Glenn-Copeland uses here in Deep River, because of their cultural significance and because enslavers feared that the drum beats could be used as a form of encoded communication. Moreover, there is something subversive in Glenn-Copeland's performance of a song written long ago as a trans person. He inhabits a body that he has himself brought into existence in a way that would have been impossible at the time of the song's conception, and performs the song with an instrumentation that would have been forbidden in another time. The coming together of these impossibilities in a single recording and a single performance speaks volumes to the power of transmusical time. To recall the words of Jose Esteban Munoz, quote, it is important to call in the past to animate it, understanding that the past has a performative nature, which is to say that rather than being static and fixed, the past does things. The idea that the past is separate and untouchable is a characteristic of straight time, and by extension, white, cis, and able-bodied time. The trans past is dynamic and active, and mutually shapes and is shaped by the present. Glenn-Copeland's performance of the African American spiritual Deep River is a quintessential example of his embodiment of the active past as a Black trans man, and highlights the idea that when he is performing, he doesn't selectively perform his gender or race, but rather the sum total of all intersecting identities that he holds. And my last example is a song called Levita.
I push to get ahead. I know I gotta make my daily bread. I know I don't have time to lose. I wonder if I really have time to choose. I barely have time to shed a tear. I hardly have time to shake the fear. And the body says, remember you gotta breathe. The body says, take the time to grieve. The mind says, let the silence flow. The mind says, allow yourself to grow. The spirit says, cast your eyes above. The spirit says, fill your heart with love. The heart says, seek the light within. The heart says, let the dance begin. And my mother says to me, enjoy your life.
Unfortunately, I have to stop it right there. Fun fact, Glenn-Copeland doesn't speak Italian, but one morning he just woke up semi-fluent, as one does, wrote the lyrics to this song, then promptly forgot the language again. So clearly Levita is an anomaly in a song and a testament to the universal broadcasting system that Glenn-Copeland credits as the divine source of all his music, and is also in many ways a trans anthem. Both the lyrics and the sound of these first two verses illustrate the logic of straight time, working day and night, pushing to get ahead, the incessant need to earn money in order to survive. The line, I wonder if I'm ever going to get it right, implies that there is a right to get to, which is not the case in the context of a trans life. Here, Glenn-Copeland is stuck in the stultifying present moment, the here and now that Munoz calls a prison house. The anxiety of these first two verses, the driving drum beat, and the disjointed ostinato repeated line of the xylophone is amplified by the flowing Italian operatic line that continues unceasingly behind his voice. This melody is a source of trans time in Levita as it harkens backward to Glenn-Copeland's musical practice pre-transition as an opera singer. He essentially uses the musical language of his past self to deliver a message of peace and gratitude to his present self. And as this message filters through to his verses throughout the course of the song, he becomes freer with his vocal expression, with his vibrato, and with his lyrics. The form of Levita is unique and doesn't actually become clear until the last moment of the song. And I'm just going to go back to this slide so you can see. Ostensibly, the song doesn't have a chorus, but rather a series of developing verses that I've labeled A, B, and C here. They're always backgrounded by the same Italian operatic line that's sung by the soprano, as well as the driving straight time of the drums and the xylophone. The undercurrent of both of these lines indicates that both the cramped straight present and the expansiveness of transtemporality are always present and moving in awkward tandem with one another. However, each verse in text and in sound brings Glenn-Copeland ever nearer to the freedom of the operatic voice. As he finds himself in step with the underlying chorus, we see that ultimately the logic of the song doesn't drive to a singular moment of climax, but rather to a time of stasis, of verticality, and of transtemporality. As this last line, my mother says to me, enjoy your life, is just repeated over and over again as kind of a mantra to himself. And he finally finds himself in unison with the Italian voice at the end, which unfortunately we didn't get to hear. But with this final unison, we hear a chorus delayed and pushed back until seemingly the last moment. The form of the song itself says that it's never too late. So in conclusion, Glenn-Copeland shows that without question the necessity of an approach to music scholarship that centers trans subjectivities. Without frameworks that explicitly detail what is trans about his music, an entire depth of field is lost in listening and in analysis. This analytic of time is central to any analysis of Beverly Glenn-Copeland's music and could certainly be applied to any number of trans folks who upset the boundaries of straight time, or even music that isn't created by a trans people, and we can still apply these same frameworks of kind of alternative ways to think about time. This framework also advances the growing and tiny field of transmusicology past a myopic lens that focuses unerringly on the sound of the voice and the appearance of the body and the way these things interact in performance settings, instead getting to the heart of the music itself. And it's important to remember that the analytic of time isn't meant to complete the picture, but rather act as a single element in a transmusical practice that is constantly evolving and is, to borrow from Glenn-Copeland, ever new. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dana. Wonderful. Next, we have Cass Urban is a senior at the University of Puget Sound. a psychology major and minors in gender and biology. They've been dancing for 10 years and are also a choreographer. And so their practice, their artistic practice is really present inside of their research. They will be presenting Escaping and Transcending the Construction and Performance of Gender in Irish Dance Shows. Thank you, Cass.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Hi, I'm Cass Urban. I use they, he pronouns, and like in the introduction, I am presenting on Escaping and Transcending the Construction Performance of Gender in Irish Dance Shows. I'd like to provide a warning that this presentation contains videos with music and sounds that might be jarring or overstimulating for some people. I will provide further warning when those appear on the slides. The general premise of this presentation will go, I'll present my argument, and then I will present videos with examples of that in the dance shows. So for some background on Irish dance, I will be focusing on 3 different shows for this project. First, Riverdance, the full-length show premiered in 1995, and Jean Butler, the image on the bottom, and Michael Flatley, the image on the top right, were leads in the show. And the show itself, while not exclusively Irish dancing, celebrated Irish culture and history. The image on the top left, Colin Dunn, had a more minor role in the show, but took the lead spot when Michael Flatley left in 1996 to create Lord of the Dance. And Lord of the Dance was a show exclusively about Irish dancing and only contained Irish dancing. It takes place on the fictional planet Ireland, and the basic plot of the show is that there is an evil Don Dorcha and fighting against the Lord of the Dance, who is portrayed by Michael Flatley, and they battle for control over the fictional planet Ireland. And there's also a minor plot of fighting for the affection of 2 love interests, Saoirse and Morgan. Jean Butler and Colin Dunn had no affiliation with this, as they were both the leads in Riverdance at this time, but in 1999 they left to create Dancing on Dangerous Ground. And the show is based on the Irish Fenian tale, The Pursuit of Diarmuid and Grania. The main characters of the show, Diarmuid, are portrayed by Colin Dunn, and then Grania are portrayed by Jean Butler. Jean Butler, or her character, Grania, is fated to marry this king. However, she has a budding romance with Diarmuid, and there is a battle that ensues for the affection of her. My main argument based around these 3 shows is that gender and the stratification of gender is maintained through a balance of conflict and performativity, and this is exemplified most in Irish dance shows. However, it's not new to Irish dance history, and that the conflict has been present throughout all of Irish dance history. So now we'll look at what current literature has to say on the topics that built up this argument. There are 3 main areas of focus that built this argument. The first is Irish dance history. There are 2 major sections of Irish dancing. The first is called Sean Nose dancing. It's the style less known. It's more socially used and is less competitive versus the style that's most often seen in Irish dancing shows, in which I'll refer to just as popular Irish dance. It's more technical, it's more skilled, and is rooted in this idea that there was a teacher, or known as the dance master, who would be the champion in Irish dancing, and he would go travel from town to town, competing against other dance masters to be able to teach their students. And that sets this precedent of conflict within Irish dance history, as there is competition set in popular Irish dance. The second area of focus is gender in dance, dance broadly as a style of artistic expression. And for that, I'd like to read the quote: "Even when costumed in the most unisex unitards, she wears point shoes and he wears ballet slippers. She extends while he supports. She resides in front while he remains in back. She looks forward as he looks at her." And this is talking about ballet. However, it does demonstrate the idea of gendered behaviors and mannerisms in dance. And I will further get into that later on how mannerisms appear specifically in Irish dance. And the third area that built this argument is conflict theory in dance, and the idea that the individual body or the isolated body is the agent of conflict that expresses competition between individuals. And so I used two main methodologies to create this argument. The first is conflict theory by Jeanette Saltzman-Chavetz, and it was inspired by Marxist conflict theory. And under Chavetz's model, men are expected to work exclusively outside the home, whereas women were expected to manage both in-home labor and any work outside the home, which led to a stratification of women having to put more effort into more labor at the same level as men. However, that means they were always able to, like, forced to play catch up in a sense to attempt to be on an equal level playing field. And that created the stratification of gender. However, and that meant there were macro and micro levels of labor enforced. And so turning this back to dance performances, there are macro and micro levels in a dance performance. However, it's more subtle. Dancers, particularly in an Irish dance performance, are performing for an audience. They're telling a story to somebody. However, upon closer investigation, a second audience emerges. Female dancers are also expected to perform for the male dancers. So male dancers are only performing for the audience, whereas female dancers are performing for two bodies, the audience and the male dancers in the show. And the second methodology in this is Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity, where gender is an act of omitted behaviors, whereas dance itself has no gender, and then when the performance is stripped down to just bare movements, certain leaps are not indicative of femininity, while others are not indicative of masculinity. But dance, in the previous quote from the other slide, shows that movements are gendered. And so in the context of Irish dance, there are gendered movements, such as looking at the upper body in movement in dancers, particularly in dance performances. Male dancers will tend to utilize their upper body more frequently and more dynamically compared to female dancers, and they will occupy their self space more, which means the area within their arm's reach will be more dynamic, whereas female dancers have more flowing upper body movements and occupy less of their self space. Scenes with female dancers also have more subtle lighting transitions and more pastel stage colorings, and male dancers have more dynamic transitions and lighting cues, things like that. And then the music that the performers are dancing to changes from dancer to dancer, scene to scene. In Irish dances, there are reels, slip jigs, hard jigs, and hornpipes. Generally speaking, those are the broadly four categories. It is more typical to see males dancing to reels, as it is considered a more dynamic and aggressive style of dance, whereas females are considered more likely to be dancing hornpipes and slip jigs. And so we'll look at some examples right now. The first will be Jean Butler in her entrance to Riverdance. It's the scene called Countess Kathleen, and following this scene, the women in the scene were performing for the attention of men following it, as men entered on the stage after this. And so that was considered to be an exemplified performance of femininity and what is expected of female dancers in Irish dance performances. That was to slip jig timing of music, and Jean Butler uses less arm movements and more flowing tone of movement throughout the piece. The next scene I'll show is a scene from Lord of the Dance. It was Morgan's reel solo. And it was also her entrance to the show, so that aspect between both the performances is the same. However, she does not perform for any romantic partner in this. I'll go ahead and play it. And so that was her reel performance. Notice I said reel there, and that was not typical and not expected of a female to be dancing to a reel, and thus is a subversion of that standard. And in this sense, her subversion of femininity leads to failure in the plot of the story of not gaining the romantic interest of the male lead. So at this point, subversion leads to failure of not attaining the goal. And we'll look at some examples of masculinity. And just a warning that these scenes do have potentially more jarring sounds. So if you'd like to lower the volume or mute me now, that's a good idea. So first we'll look at the final battle scene in Lord of the Dance. It's Lord of the Dance, who is portrayed by Michael Flatley, versus the evil Don Dorcha. And they, just a reminder, are fighting for control of the fictional planet Ireland. And so that was just two of them fighting to compete to win, which really exemplifies the old standard of, in Irish dance, the dance masters competing against each other, and goes back to just deeply rooted Irish dance histories of conflict and competition. The next scene I'll show is the final battle in Dancing on Dangerous Ground. The Diarmuid versus the King Finn McCool's army. Diarmuid, just a reminder, is played by Colin Dunn, and he is the love interest for Grania, who is portrayed by Jean Butler. I'll play that right now. And so it's small differences, but that scene was more flowy, I guess is the best way to describe it. There aren't as many dynamic lighting changes as the scene in Lord of the Dance. And it's important to note, based on the plot of that scene, that at that point in time, Diarmuid was dancing for Grania as she had just been poisoned. So he is dancing to be reunited with her. And so there is a sort of sub level of he's dancing for a love interest, whereas Michael Flatley in Lord of the Dance was just dancing to compete and to show the audience a competition. So he in that way is subverting the standard for masculinity, and in that the result of that is he ultimately gets captured by the king's army and reunites with Grania in death. So not a great ending, but that's another example of subversion leading to failure, which leads to right now, in terms of my thinking on gender and Irish dance as a whole, because this topic is not something I'm ever going to stop thinking about, and transcending these performances beyond just a direct subversion. And so the stories told in Irish dance shows, as you've probably picked up on by now, maybe, are rooted in historical stories and mythologies. And one way that happens in popular Irish dance nowadays is through what's called set dances. And specifically, traditional set dances are often based on stories. The first I'll show you is a direct subversion, just an example of how that more now popularly can be subverted, is called a set dance called Garden of Daisies, and was used historically as a dance originally titled Garland of Daisies, and was a celebration of Garland Sunday in Ireland, which is the last Sunday of July, and it's a celebration of, like, with a feast, and there's dancing, and the women would wear garlands of potato stalks, and so this dance is based around that. And also, just another warning, this does have potentially loud or jarring sounds. And so that's still playing into the idea in the system that there are still gendered aspects of dance, even within popular Irish dance and the competitive style of dance. I'm sorry, the music was sort of muted and you primarily heard my dancing over it. But so that's still playing into the system, which means it's more of a direct subversion rather than transcending it. So the next video I'm going to show you is another set dance. There's two categories of set dance. There's traditional and modern set dances. The traditional one I showed you is Garden of Daisies. The modern one is called Downfall of Paris. It still has a historically relevant background and backstory. It was created based on the invasion of Paris during the Battle of Waterloo. And so that in itself isn't inherently gendered within the context of Irish dance. There's no gender tied to the background of the story. So I'll play that now. And again, can't really hear the music, unfortunately. It's a great piece of music though. And so that shows what opportunities for dance can be like outside the system, where dances are inherently gendered based on their backstory. And so going forward, thinking about queer futures, I'm thinking that, and this has just brought me up to the present day of thinking about these topics, is that the Irish dance community needs to turn to competitive dance to start thinking about changes in the way that dancing is done and performed, because there is usually, when dancers compete well and perform well on a competition level, then they move on to performances when they're older. So there is that sort of pipeline. And right now, the Irish dance competitive world is fairly behind on discussing gender. So I started a project in January called Divergent Dance to force discussion on dance studios and schools, with the goal to create, inform, and collaborate with fellow dancers on how gender and sexuality exists in the Irish dance community. And we're in the process of creating an education certification process that schools can receive, and also creating a resource-based website and doing interviews and panels with schools to start a discussion, because within the Irish dance community, it's predominantly that the rules and regulations are created by older, cis, predominantly white people in Ireland, and the discussion needs to happen very loudly for them to change the rules. And so thinking more towards the future, in conclusion, gender is just restating the argument. Gender is maintained and reproduced through a balance of conflict, and that balance is kept through inequality of who the dancers are performing for. And the Irish dance shows don't show a revolutionized form of Irish dance because of the conflict and competition-based roots of Irish dance history. And so thinking of future research opportunities, I'm focused on incorporating competition and stories of conflict into performance without incorporating a system that perpetuates gender stratification, and to identify if it is possible to incorporate stories with gendered backgrounds without falling back into gendered performances and perpetuating this stratified system. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cass. Really great. Okay, our last presenter. Oh, before I introduce Caitlin, I just want to also remind people that you can, for those of you that came in a little late, you can always put questions in to the chat directly to Kendall, so we can accumulate those questions. So when we get to the Q&A at the end, you'll have your questions. So last but not least is Caitlin Chow-Ise, is a Lewis and Clark sophomore and an aspiring sex educator. They're the creator of @the Sex Talk on Instagram, which centers pleasure and sexuality specifically for queer people of color. Caitlin is a SOAN major and a gender studies minor, and they are presenting Becoming a Sexually Liberated Me, a zine, which is also available for view currently in the art gallery show with the Gender Symposium. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you, Rebecca. I hope y'all can hear me. I am going to share my slides. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting on my zine, Becoming a Sexually Liberated Me. This zine is about me and my experiences with gender, queerness, race, and sexuality. I started this project in August of 2020 and only got around to actually publishing it in January 2021. It was a very scary process. And I'm speaking about it for the first time with all of you. So if you could hold some grace, that would be great. So this zine is about me and it holds tender words about my self-discovery. Thank you for sharing in my vulnerability. The first piece in my zine is called Femme. Femininity is a double-edged sword. I'm a queer bisexual femme. For so long, I resisted my femininity. I couldn't hide it, but I tried. Now I'm listening to girl pop. It makes me feel things. Reconciling my femininity is central to my existence. I'm done blocking it out. I love saying OMG and dressing up, and that doesn't make me any less queer than you. Women of color. I am my ancestors' greatest dream. I've never done well with this statement, perhaps because I feel no connection to my ancestors. My mom never cared to build any. I am grasping at straws, trying to connect to them, to connect to my papa and gungung, of whom I think constantly. I visit the Chinese garden to feel my roots. I point things out to my partner as if I had some ancestral connection to them, but I don't feel it. I feel like the garden is the only place I can just exist. Or maybe I'm trying to blend in and convince others that I am one of them. I am a member of the ASU, as if I belong there, but I don't. I don't know what they're talking about half the time. I didn't have a cultural upbringing. I'm just starting it by myself now. But sometimes I feel like the biggest fraud. I'm not sure if my ancestors dreamed of this. Here is a collage that I made on identity for a class last year about something that's important to me. And I chose to talk about queerness and sex. So yeah. She, they. Part of my sexual liberation is gender liberation. Realizing my gender is a seemingly never-ending process, which is hard for someone who wants answers all the time. It's such a wild ride. Sometimes that means it's fun and experimental, but most times it means crying on my bed, feeling suffocated by my clothes. Dysphoria is the only word I know to describe it. I feel claustrophobic and hopeless, but I keep trying to convince myself it's leading me to euphoric feelings of liberations. Winter Season, which was written in fall 2020. I'm supposed to be connected to myself and my body as an aspiring sex educator, but I can't be right now. I cry when I have sex because I feel so broken. I just can't right now, but I'm working on it. And then this breathing exercise is after a lot of heavy things. So if anybody wants to do it along with me, go ahead. So breathe into your belly. Exhale with whatever sounds want to come with it. Allow yourself to think all the thoughts. Keep breathing. Notice any tenseness and relax. Unclench your jaw. Move how you need to move and make the noises you need to make. So my last page of my zine talks about liberation and the ways that I'm practicing that. Doing my makeup, conscious attempts to touch myself, solo dance parties, being in community with other sexually liberated people, leaning into my femininity, reading, and letting myself accept that I won't always know what I'm doing. But what is sexual liberation? In the beginning, I sought out to talk about my experiences with lingerie and sex and all of those kinds of things that come to mind. But as it turns out, and as you have noticed in this zine, my sexual liberation begins with my identities. I didn't talk about sex much in my zine at all, because I realized that that wasn't my concern. My concern was what was at the root of that, and that is my queerness and my Asianness and all of those things. So I want to talk about anger as a space for imagination. This zine is so angry. I've been so angry lately. I've been angry at a lack of understanding from both myself and others of who I am, what I'm doing, what I'm all about. And in a never-ending attempt to be understood, because I seem fixated on that, I decided to be vulnerable with folks through this zine. And on my last page of my zine, I say, I'm still on a path to becoming liberated, and the journey is not a linear one. That's really important. This liberation that I imagined was freeing and satisfying and a goal to be accomplished. But what I realized in creating it is that the liberation space is non-linear and it has room for anger. And maybe anger is what will drive us forward. Maybe we will be freed when we discuss our anger and let it create an opportunity for imagination and for change. Thank you. That's the end of my slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And I think we can have all the other panelists back now for some questions. And I will just clap for you because you can't hear all of the people clapping, I'm sure, on their video screens. We will channel them. And I just want to express just how honored I feel to hold some space for you all. I thought all your presentations were really fantastic, and there's a lot of vulnerability in them in different ways. And so I just feel super honored to share this space with you inside of that risk and that courage. So I wonder if Kendall, if there are questions in the chat. Hooray.
Yeah, the first one is actually for Caitlin. There are two that I have right now, but the first question is, how did you cope with the contradictory feelings that arise during healing and self-discovery?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm still trying to figure it out. Honestly, part of coping is, for me, writing that zine is like being able to literally have a physical space in which I can say, this is true. And on the next page, it's also totally untrue and I don't identify with it at all. I feel very in between things all the time. And so just trying to come to terms with being in between and being in the middle is something that I'm always trying to figure out.
Thank you. And the second question, which is for all presenters, and then there's another question coming up after that. How does your research inform your current art making, because you're all artists? So the research that you've done and presented on, how does that inform your current art making process?
I can take that on first. So when I choreograph steps now, I'm more intentional about the movements that I'm making and implementing in the steps. And as a dance teacher, I'm more aware of the steps that I'm teaching my students, and I have more conversations with them about gender and dance and the relationship between gender and dance to further the discussion.
I can go next. So I think, as was mentioned in my introduction, I'm a violinist, and I primarily play classical music, which is a problematic discipline at best. And I feel like throughout the process of my research and like writing this really long thing about this like amazing like trans composer that I had never really heard of, like, I mean, it helped me think about mindfulness in my practice of music making and think about like where do these sounds come from, like what part of myself do the sounds that I'm making like emanate from, and like why am I even making them in the first place. And like over the past year I've tried to become more conscientious about um like the source of the music that I'm playing. Since I don't write my own music, I'm just you know, performing what other people have written for me, which is an interesting experience because it feels sometimes very impersonal and like you don't have a lot of creative control or input. But I think in reality, like we as musicians have a lot of power to like shape our own experiences and the way that people experience the music that we create. And I think like just being more critical of like the most minute details can sometimes be the most rewarding, I guess. I hope that was comprehensible. But yeah, it is really um he as a person has really helped me, I think, with my musical practice, and has become incredibly important to me personally. So yeah.
Yeah. I guess I didn't really do research, but it was definitely an exercise in finally putting down all of the thoughts that I think about every single day. Um, and the weird thing to me is that when I first started like selling my zines, people read them. And I hadn't thought about that when I was making them. I just kind of thought of it as like a journal. I wrote down my thoughts whenever I was angry or whatever I was thinking about. So I think that's something that I definitely want to carry with me is like, you know, it's for myself. And if other people resonate, that's great. They can take away whatever they want. But I think that was an important thing for me to not be producing for somebody else, but for myself.
Great. This question is for Dana specifically. Gabe says, "Hi Dana, I am a queer trans man as well and will definitely be checking out Glenn's music. Can you recommend any other trans artists?"
Yeah. I guess one person that has been on my mind a lot recently because of her really tragic passing is Sophie, which is a very different genre of music. Um, but yeah, she was a trans like hyperpop like producer, and worked with a lot of like really um famous musicians that you've definitely heard of. And like yeah, she passed like very suddenly and unexpectedly recently. So yeah, if you want to honor her and listen to her music. And one person that I love because I love synthesizer type stuff is Wendy Carlos, who is like basically the pioneer of like synthesized music. And if you've seen A Clockwork Orange, she did the soundtrack for A Clockwork Orange. I really hate that movie, to be completely honest, but the soundtrack is really good. So yeah, if you're interested in either of those two, check them out. If you want, I can put my email in the chat and I can email you some more too.
And Laura asks, "Each project seems invested in making an intervention that makes future look different than the now in musicology, in dance, and personal discovery. How has gender theory helped you to think about what kinds of change are possible in your field?"
I can go, I think. A lot of everything that I do in my life is very much influenced by Black feminist thought and the creation of spaces for healing, but also for imagination and imagining futures that are seem revolutionary in counterculture, but it's just the way that Black feminists have been living. But yeah, I would certainly say that the discussion of pleasure as a necessity, you know, Audre Lorde and Angela Davis and all of these amazing feminists spoke about these things as if they were just common sense, when it seems like a lot of folks are only realizing that, like running my page is, oh my gosh, I should take care of myself, or, you know, I should invest in community care. Like, that's wild. But I think that reading those things has like opened up my perspective to a whole nother world.
I think that part of what I gain from like queer theory, but also from like the experience of like doing this project specifically, is like an era of like radical positivity for like what is possible in the future. And I think it's like so difficult, like especially right now, to like actually have like this like really open, like expansive outlook on like what we can create, like Caitlin said, like imagining like futures, like queer futures that that like we have the power to like materialize, hopefully. And I think like Glenn's music specifically like has this like sense of like, oh my God, like I can sit in my body and I can be happy. I can sit in my mind and I can be happy, like as this like queer trans person I am. I don't have to rush. Like I can take my time and I, you know, like explore as we're able. And I think like yeah, like thinking about like Cruising Utopia, Jose Esteban Munoz, like thinking about doing things like for and towards this like queer, like really like open futurity. I don't know, that it just has been something that's like been getting me through honestly recently, with like all the wonderful things that are happening in the world right now. So yeah.
I really like your point, Dana, about radical positivity, because that's something I gathered a lot from reading queer theory leading up to the creation of my thesis and my dance thought in general. Because at least growing up in dance and then transitioning while being a dancer, I had a lot of feelings and I knew they were concrete ideas and theories. I just didn't know how to place them and then position myself back within dance in my gender identity. And that in itself took work. And I think that understanding queer theory helps to understand gender and dance a lot better. Yeah, and so through the project Divergent Dance, that sort of makes the radical positivity of knowledge of these queer theories in dance and how they intersect more available to other dancers.
Cass, I actually have another question for you that kind of ties into your answer. This comes from Phoenix. How does being a trans individual impact your teaching as a dance instructor? Specifically, how do you enforce that the gender binary is a construct while also teaching choreography?
Yeah, so I make my identity fairly clear to my students, and I'm very transparent about my experiences in dance, and I make myself available to have conversations about gender in dance with my students. I also, when I teach certain movements, I ask how does that feel in relationship with your gender and your body? How can we modify that to make that better for you, specifically in terms of dances such as the slip jig, as I mentioned in my presentation, that's in the competition dance world, that's traditionally only done by women at the championship level. However, boys are expected to know how to do it to become and pass the teacher qualifying exam. So everyone needs to know it, but it's really only expected that women perform it. And I think that now there's a movement towards normalizing slip jig across all genders in competition, and I make that discussion very clear with my students.
Those are all the questions that were in the chat.
Right. I have a few questions, but I actually want to give you all an opportunity to ask each other questions if there are things that came up for you in listening to each other's work, or even resonances. You don't have to, doesn't have to be a question, can also be a thought.
And Caitlin, I just want to say to you that I really deeply appreciated the openness of your presentation, and I thought that was such an incredible and brave thing to do in front of all of us, even though you can only see 3 of us. But yeah, I just really appreciated that, and the breathing exercise helped me personally, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Dana. Yeah, y'all's presentations were amazing, and that's not something that I think about a lot, or at least have not studied so much yet, is trans time and queering art, and things like that. So I'm just wondering, I know that you are both performers and artists, but what is your biggest fascination with this theory, or talking about these sorts of things? What really is the catalyst for you wanting to speak about this?
I guess in terms of the catalyst, my main catalyst for speaking about this was when I started this thinking in fall of 2017. I was the only trans person I knew in the United States who was a Irish dancer. So that alone, of course, it was false. I just wasn't able to connect with anyone else or talk with anyone else at that time. And since talking about it, since thinking and developing these ideas, I've been able to grow a connection of people around the world who are trans Irish dancers. And I think that's definitely the goal with this.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I guess my fixation really on this topic comes from a few directions. The first being that I have been really fascinated with queer temporality as a theory for several years now, and have written several papers along those lines, but always, I don't know, never really honing in on I feel what I actually wanted to be saying. And it wasn't until I realized that I could connect music and queer time that I really felt a connection to the topic. And as a trans individual, thinking about the work that exists, and I didn't have time enough to really talk about this in my presentation, but the really complete, almost complete dearth of scholarship on trans experience in music that doesn't revolve around the sound of the singing voice and the physical body as a conveyor of performance is kind of astounding. It just I found two things maybe that kind of talk about this, and really not even in the way that I wanted to. And so once I realized that there was this pretty massive gap in the field, because queer musicology is it's a thing. It's like way behind like where queer theory is, I would say, in a lot of ways. But like trans musicology, not super much a thing. So I like really wanted to like combine those two interests and like see where I could get with that and like kind of yeah, like move things forward like a little tiny bit. So yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you, guys.
I have a quick question for you, Dana. First of all, you did a great job with your presentation. Since I had the privilege of watching this project for you begin in thesis and seeing it develop over time, how has it changed since we finished our theses? Like, how has your thinking about it changed?
I could ask you the same question. And I might. To be honest, I don't think it's changed much, but it's had time to settle, I guess. Because, you know, obviously we're moving, you know, towards graduation and I don't know, I've got a lot of stuff to do. But like, yeah, I mean like kind of taking time away from it, I feel like made me appreciate it more, if that is kind of an anti-answer to your question. But yeah, I think I don't know. It gave me time to appreciate kind of the emotional aspect of the work more than the oh my God, I have to like turn in my thesis and like write this like 40-page paper. It like yeah, it feels more like a feeling now than an assignment, which is really nice, I guess. So yeah. Yeah, what about you? How's yours changed? I saw you put in videos of yourself dancing, which you didn't have before, and I was curious
Yeah.
about that.
So I got funding for my Divergent Dance project right after we submitted our theses. So that project, sort of in opposition to what you said about having time to step away from it, I dove more into it. And I was able to connect with other trans and queer dancers and hear their stories and hear a variety of different perspectives, because my predominant perspective is I was a student of dance for most of my dance experience, so that's my leading take on this. However, I have spoken with people in sort of the adjudicator community, the people on like Irish dance governing commissions, other Irish dance teachers, and that has really shaped how I'm approaching this topic more thoroughly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was like so happy to hear about your Divergent Dance project, and it yeah, I'm happy for you. It seems really
Thank
cool.
you.
Well, that has a little bit to do with the question that I wanted to ask. I was really compelled by everything today. But one of the things that kept occurring to me is how these ways, these different aspects of your experience that you're speaking to in relationship to presence, in relationship to process, feels so much a part of creativity to me, feel like just distinctly a part of the creative process, like how you make art in the world. And I feel like I really was so curious about this kind of knitting together of your personal excavations of identity and your relationship to identity in the world and your artistic process, and the way those two things are so intricately knit together and that even the language feels the same. And just to like drop in, so I want to ask about that, and then just to drop in sort of the theme of the symposium, which I feel like is so present in all of your work, is this question of presence. There was a beautiful sort of explanation on the website at the end of sort of what the theme is for the symposium, and I just wanted to read it because it felt really present for all of your work. Attending to absence is an act of recovery as well as a project of imagination, which I feel like you're really pointing to, Caitlin. All of you are. Join us at this year's symposium, considering not only that what has been lacking, but also in exploring what it means to pursue presence. So I wonder if you would speak to like what sort of presence means to you, not only in an embodied sense, but in visibility, right? And being present in your field and in the things that you're speaking to. And then maybe also talk a little bit about the ways that artistic practice and identity practice like speak to each other.
Yeah, I think I can go. It's sort of a not fully formulated thought on my end, but
Give you a lot.
it's okay. Something that ever since my first coming to college, like that I've been very fascinated with and passionate about, sometimes to the chagrin of like professors, is autoethnography in sociology and in gender studies, but they're kind of the same thing. I, in like all of the art that I make, it's always very concerned with words. Last year I did the art therapy session, which I'm sure many of you are doing tomorrow. And like I could not write words down because I feel like this very big need to be understood, and I'm not sure that I could do that without words. And so in sociology, I'm always very invested in like, this is my identity. I need to explain it to people in order to even get anything done. So I'm not sure that that totally answers the question. And I don't even think that it's necessarily for visibility's sake, like I'm representing, you know, XYZ identity, but it's more of a, you can't really understand me if you don't understand the need for me to share these specific things, and also like, why am I doing that in the first place? So I feel like doing zines is really the right avenue for me to pursue, because I can just barf a bunch of words up onto a page and say, here, try to decipher this. So that's definitely what I've been focusing on lately.
Yeah, and and that it holds complexity. I mean, that's the other thing I hear from you is like, there's a way in which the artistic expression can hold all of the complexity of that.
Yes,
experience.
exactly. And like, though I applaud everybody who does any form of traditional art, if I feel that it could be misinterpreted, I don't love that. So yeah, being able to provide nuance and say, you know, look, there is complexity, and it's not just look at a beautiful painting and form your own thoughts about it. I sort of want to inform
Yes.
what everybody else thinks.
Yes.
I really appreciate, Caitlin, how you bring in sort of the idea that you don't understand me if you don't understand my relationship with, in your case, words. It's in my case, dance. And in terms of it being present in my navigation through my gender and queer studies minor, I think that, so in the very first introductory gender and queer studies class I took, I knew then that somehow Irish dance and gender was going to be the focus of my thesis. So it has always been present in my mind in every GQS themed class that I took, and has influenced most of my projects in those classes. And for me, it's sort of the way that words, like in your case, Caitlin, sort of emit like sort of a further understanding. I'm able to do that with dance, and I'm able to explore more complexities in thought through dance.
Yeah, I guess like your question made me think about like classical music is a like performance is a very gendered space, and like it's like very traditional very traditional, very visibly gendered, like which isn't like really what I talk it's kind of what I avoid talking about in my thesis. Not that I want to ignore it, but that it is, I think, overrepresented, so I was trying to move away from that a little bit. But I think like there is a lot to be said for like the power of the physical presence of like trans bodies performing genres of music that wouldn't necessarily have been available to them. And I talked a little bit about that with like Glenn's performance of Deep River, and like the way that like him just like existing like in his body and like putting these sounds together that like that might not sound unexpected to like if you weren't really thinking about it, like, oh yeah, it's just like a drum and he's singing, like that's normal. But like it really, there's like so much more that like goes into that, and like there's so much thought and so much care that goes into like the construction of that performance, and like not only thought and care but also like hundreds of years of history and of baggage. um and I'm kind of losing track of what the question was.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'm just talking.
No.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm beautiful. I mean, I feel like you all said beautiful things. Let's see. I was gonna say,
I think my
am I glitchy? It might be me.
I think Dana's glitchy.
Yeah, right? You never know. That's the thing. I was gonna ask Dana one other question, but maybe we lost them. Okay, any other questions from the chat? You can also raise your hand. Oh, Kendall has a question. Fantastic. Kendall.
Yeah, Phoenix, oh, we just lost
I didn't
Dana.
lose them. What?
Hi, sorry, my Wi-Fi
Yeah, no
went
worries.
out.
You're good, you're good.
Good, because this question from Phoenix is both to Dana and Cass. How do you cope with the isolation of being a queer and trans performer? Both of you kind of attended to that, but if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for me at least, the best thing once I recognized that isolation, I acknowledged the feelings, but I wanted to connect with other people because I knew like deep down I wasn't the only trans Irish dancer. I couldn't possibly be. So I reached out to people who from the dance school that I danced with, and that led me to connecting with other people. And that really shaped the connections with other trans Irish dancers I have now.
I'm still going in and out a little bit, so I apologize if things are weird. I mean, just like the way that I exist visibly in the world is, you know, like I wouldn't say at this moment in my life that I'm a visibly trans person. And that complicates things a little bit, and I guess makes it difficult to sometimes to get across what I want to get across in a performance setting, and that can be upsetting, and deeply, I mean, this is kind of yeah, it's a deeply personal thing, but it definitely informs my performance practice and like makes me really think about the way that I move my body and the way that I act, and it I don't know, it's something that I'm still coming to terms with, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of the really beautiful things that Beverly Glenn gives us is this idea of process and all like always the possibility of what it is now, which again feels like so much, I resonate with that so much about performance, right? It's always, what is it now? What is it today? And how do we give ourselves grace around that, as we live, as we are. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions in the chat? No. just thank you so much for your brilliance and your vulnerability and your creativity and your activism and your presence in the world. I am made bigger by knowing you for these 90 minutes. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to our audience for being here. And thank you to the symposium co-chairs who were heroic, and Kim Brodkin and all the work on the symposium. I'll just point folks towards a couple things coming up in the symposium. One is the art show. I hope you're here because you like art, and so go check out the virtual gallery on the website. The keynote speakers tonight, Carmen Maria Machado, is from 5 to 6, and tomorrow Jennifer Nash from 5 to 6:30. And then on Friday, the secretaries, which is the theater department's contribution to the symposium, and I've seen it, and it is badass. It's so good, and crazy and fun, and so please check it out, and just thank you all for being here. Hooray, we would all clap, we would all hear it. We can all imagine the love. Thank you very much. Bye everybody.